For 5 million years, the Colorado River was Mother Nature's impetuous child, raging over its banks in the spring and shrinking to a trickle in the winter. But then, in 1935, with the completion of the Mammoth Boulder Dam, later renamed Hoover Dam, the wild Colorado River was brought to heel. Tamed by the Great Dam, the Colorado became known as the hardest working river in the world, bringing precious water to the arid southwestern United States. How did Hoover Dam, the biggest and most expensive project in the world at the time, come to be? Big things have small beginnings. The story starts with the problems facing a small but gritty community on the California-Mexico border in 1907 and ends with the meteoric rise of El Centro Congressman Philip David Swing to the national stage. The Imperial Valley today is a vast quilt of fields, towns, geothermal plants, solar and wind farms. Back in 1907, however, it was a community of family farms at risk of extinction. From 1905 to 1907, due to epic storms upriver, the Colorado River overflowed its bank just south of the Mexican border near Yuma, Arizona, and overwhelmed the fragile water delivery system built by the California Development Company, an underfunded private irrigation enterprise. The breach was catastrophic. For months, the entire river flowed into the Imperial Valley, tearing through roads and homes, threatening to inundate 1 million acres of land. It gouged a deep scar across the earth and recreated the ancient Lake Cahuilla. Today, we call it the Salton Sea. When the Colorado River was brought back within its banks in 1907, the residents of the Imperial Valley knew that without huge investments to control it, the river would again flood their lands. The clock was ticking. The Colorado River's destructive rampage made national news. President Teddy Roosevelt assured the nation that the people of the Imperial Valley would be protected from another disaster. His words encouraged the settlers, but in the end, they were only empty promises. The settlers recognized that they had two main problems. They needed to tame the river to prevent too much or too little water coming into the valley, and they needed to get their irrigation system out of Mexico, where they faced constant problems. Both daunting challenges. During 1907, the year of recovery from the Great Flood, the nation was in turmoil due to an historic economic recession. Many people left their homes to seek greener pastures. Settlers poured into Imperial Valley looking for a new beginning. Philip David Swing was one of them. Little did he know he would become a national figure and Imperial Valley's most important citizen. Born in 1884, Swing grew up one of 6 children on a dry land farm outside of San Bernardino. Though young Phil was valedictorian of his high school class, his family could support only one son at university and asked him to wait 2 years until his older brother graduated. But Phil Swing was stubborn and determined. He worked his way through Stanford waiting tables and delivering laundry, and still graduated with honors in 1905. But Swing's journey really started in 1907 when he took a train to El Centro, California to become an unpaid assistant to John Eshelman, the district attorney. He helped Eshelman form Imperial County and the Imperial Irrigation District, a public corporation set up to manage the water in the region. Swing later became district attorney himself, then legal counsel for the IID and a Superior Court judge. Right away, Swing learned that in the desert, water is life. He would make it his mission to secure that precious resource for the Imperial Valley and all of California. Back in 1896, Charles Rockwood and Anthony Heber started the California Development Company to bring water to the Imperial Valley using a network of canals. But a lack of funding forced them to turn over their dream to celebrated irrigationist George Chafee. Chafee could have built a canal from the Colorado River through 6 miles of high sand dunes, but that would have been extremely expensive. Engineers weren't even sure such a canal through the sand would hold water. So instead, in 1901, Chaffee diverted water from the Colorado River through Mexico, south of the dunes, and then back into the United States. While allowing Chaffee to get started on the cheap, this spawned an array of problems. Sometimes farmers in Mexico pirated water by building their own diversion ditches. For every man and every piece of equipment the California Development Company sent across the border, it had to pay a hefty tax to Mexico. And with little clout in a foreign country, the CDC couldn't do anything about it. Having a canal in a foreign country turned out to be very expensive. What else could go wrong? In the spring of 1911, the Mexican Revolution arrived along the border. For some, the war next door was a spectacle to enjoy from afar. The CDC found itself right in the middle of it. Rebels stole farmer supplies and either burned or flooded their fields. The irrigation system itself was a target. The CDC requested federal troops to protect its water system, but the U.S. government refused to send troops to a foreign country. When these problems in Mexico and debts from the flood forced the California Development Company to declare bankruptcy, the people of the Imperial Valley, through the Imperial Irrigation District, took over the CDC's irrigation system. To pay the purchase price, the IID borrowed $3 million that the people of the Imperial Valley would have to pay back. The IID recognized the urgency of moving its irrigation system to the United States. Times were desperate, but hope came with a name. Phil Swing was now IID's legal advisor. As Swing came on board to secure water for the Imperial Valley, an even bigger event changed his plans. The United States entered World War I. Hearing his country's call, he answered in every way he could. Swing gave speech after speech to sell victory bonds, and then enlisted in the Army Artillery. But the Great War ended in November of 1918. So Swing returned to his job, ready to take the Valley's quest to Congress. Wasting no time, Swing wrote a bill in 1919 for Congressman William Kettner to get the nation's financial backing for a $30 million bond to build a supply canal entirely in the United States and end the increasingly difficult water disputes with Mexico. To the House Committee on Irrigation of Arid Lands, Swing explained the drawbacks of an irrigation system in Mexico and the need for an all-American canal. We represent the plain American farmers of the Imperial Valley who are fighting for their homes and a chance to live. Swing spoke eloquently, and the committee listened. But Carl Hayden of Arizona said, "The Congress must look to the development not only of the Imperial Valley, but to the Colorado River as a whole." The bill died, but Swing had awakened the western states to the treasure of the Colorado River. Back in 1858, a young lieutenant with the whimsical name of Joseph Christmas Ives steamed upriver from the Gulf of California in his clumsy, flat-bottomed steamboat. Yuma and Mojave Indians watched from the banks and gathered wherever he came ashore. As Ives reached Black Canyon, where Hoover Dam sits today, his boat hit a submerged rock and broke up. He advanced another 30 miles upriver with a makeshift sail and oars. After climbing out through treacherous terrain, Ives said, "It seems intended by nature that the Colorado River, along the greater portion of its lonely and majestic way, shall be forever unvisited and undisturbed." He was a bit wrong about that. Years later, in 1869 and 1872, a one-armed Civil War colonel, John Wesley Powell, explored the length of the Colorado River and had a vision of the river nurturing thousands of family farms. Ives and Powell's reports helped the government realize that Phil Swing was onto something big. Swing had gotten the wheels in motion. Congress tasked Powell's nephew, Arthur Powell Davis, of the Reclamation Service to begin a comprehensive survey of the Imperial Valley and the Colorado River. Swing decided that the best way to pursue the battle for water was to run for Congress himself. His catchy slogan, 7 come 11, represented Swing's district, the 11th, which included 7 counties, all the way from the Mexican border to Bishop, encompassing fully 1/3 of the territory of the state of California. Buoyed by his skills as a speaker and tireless campaigner, Swing won handily in 1920. On Swing's trip to Washington in 1921 for his first term, he visited the likely site for a dam at Boulder Canyon, 350 miles north of El Centro. Standing 1,500 feet above the river along a sheer cliff, Swing had an attack of vertigo. On the way down, he spent so much time with his back to the rock face that he shredded the seat of his pants. Gazing down to the river from on high had disoriented Swing, but from then on, he would not lose his balance. As the survey of the river moved forward, all the states along its path had woken up to the treasure it held, the treasure of water and electricity. The fight over who would get that treasure was on. Wolves were at the door. Dividing and distributing the waters of the Colorado was not an easy task, so Congress quickly formed an interstate group to answer the most important questions. How much water did the Colorado River have? How was it to be divided up? Phil Swing helped choose Herbert Hoover, Secretary of Commerce, as chairman of the Colorado River Commission. The members bickered for long sessions, unable to agree on much of anything. Each commissioner inflated his home state's need for water. Because California had land ready to be irrigated and rapidly growing cities, the other states were afraid that California would take all the water. A commissioner from Colorado, Delph Carpenter, came up with a simple solution. Divide the water evenly, half and half between the northern and southern basin states. He picked a division point in Arizona called Lee's Ferry. Based on some optimistic data, the commission awarded 7.5 million acre-feet each to the upper and lower basin states. The Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922, but it still had to be ratified by the legislatures of the 7 states. Utah and Arizona said no. Despite this setback, Phil Swing submitted legislation calling for the U.S. government to build a high dam to impound water and produce electricity, as well as an all-American canal. He recruited a partner in Senator Hiram Johnson, former governor of California and fellow progressive Republican, to submit the bill in the U.S. Senate. From then on, the bill would be known as the Swing-Johnson bill, but on April 23, 1922, the bill died in committee. The wolves at the door wanted the treasure of water and power for themselves. Arizona proposed building its own dam upriver in Glen Canyon. The city of Los Angeles and its utilities wanted to control the dam and whatever electrical plant came with it. Utah said it owned any water that passed through it. There were other setbacks. Supporter Albert Fall, Secretary of Interior, resigned in disgrace for taking bribes from private oil contractors in what was called the Teapot Dome scandal. The new secretary, Hubert Work, then fired Arthur Powell Davis, the author of the report that promoted the dam. Swing still had the support of President Warren Harding, and he moved to leverage that support. Swing arranged for Harding to visit the dam site and the Imperial Valley on his western tour. But Harding took sick in San Francisco and a few days later died of a heart attack. Was this strike 3 for a dam and a canal? It was the Roaring Twenties, the time of rapid technological and social change. The country celebrated an economic boom of automobiles, telephones, paved roads, and the wonders of electric appliances. Women won the right to vote through the 19th Amendment and charged forward into freer lifestyles. But the Roaring Twenties took place mostly in the cities. Things were different in rural Imperial Valley. Landowners prospered, but farm workers earned little, and electricity didn't come to many farms until the 1930s. For those on the Mexican side of the border, however, there was plenty of excitement. These were the days of Prohibition. Liquor was illegal in the United States, but not in Mexico. So the vice economy of booze, prostitution, and gambling prospered just across the border. Revelers from all over the West arrived to visit the bars and casinos in Mexico. Phil Swing, a non-drinker himself, established an early curfew to discourage drunkenness. This didn't go over well with much of the citizenry, but Swing was re-elected nevertheless. During the Roaring Twenties, the Colorado River lay over the horizon to the east like a sleeping beast. Sometimes it woke up angrily, like in 1921, when the river ran at 170,000 feet per second, 15 times its average flow. Secondary levees held, and again farmers could work their land. In 1924, the river slowed to a trickle, flowing less than 2,500 feet per second. Some farmers lost everything. The only solution to regulate the flow was a dam, the biggest dam in the world. With all the states on the Colorado River leery of any deal to benefit the Imperial Valley, it was ironically back home where Swing had the biggest opposition. A group of Americans controlled all the land in Mexico where the canal system ran. The Los Angeles Times owner, Harrison Gray Otis, had bought 800,000 acres of Mexican land back in 1895. His son-in-law, Harry Chandler, and a group of investors took over that property and bought another 47,000 acres on the U.S. side. Chandler had a lot of pull. Chandler opposed the All-American Canal. He also opposed a government-built high dam for producing electricity. Chandler was connected to the private electric power producers, so he wanted to separate flood control, which would benefit him in Mexico, from power production, which in the hands of his private sector allies could help his financial interests in Los Angeles. Since Chandler now also owned the LA Times, his newspaper constantly ran editorials and features opposing the Swing-Johnson bill. He was Swing's fiercest and most influential opponent. Swing was down, but not out. In October of 1925, he invited U.S. senators to hold a hearing in El Centro. The senators learned of the Colorado River Control Club, a group made up of farmers and citizens which supported a low dam, but not an all-American canal. In other words, they aligned with Harry Chandler and against Phil Swing. The senators wanted to know why they should support the bill if Imperial Valley farmers themselves were against it. Swing was prepared. He knew that this club, in its pamphlets, had hidden its true agenda of opposing the All-American Canal. The people signed up thinking they were supporting Phil Swing. When they found out that they had been fooled, they resigned by the hundreds. To his fellow senators, Hiram Johnson held up handfuls of letters from people resigning from the Chandler-backed club. The final blow to Chandler's scheming was when Arizona Senator Henry Ashurst asked Chandler's lieutenant, Charles E. Scott, why Chandler was opposed to the Swing-Johnson bill. "I don't feel qualified to answer," said Scott. Ashurst said he could provide an answer. "In the nomenclature of the poker table, no man with 4 aces ever clamored for a new deal." "That is correct," said Scott. Why didn't Chandler want an all-American canal? Because such a canal might cut off Chandler's free supply of water in Mexico. The Colorado River wasn't the only river that could flood. In April of 1927, the Mississippi River broke its banks and grew to 70 miles wide, covering 23,000 square miles of land, inundating towns, and washing away homes. 246 people died. It was just a matter of time for a similar flood to overwhelm the Imperial Valley. As Phil Swing toured the devastation along the Mississippi, he heard a story repeated in different forms. In cotton-producing states, farmers were against Phil Swing's dam because it would irrigate 1 million new acres of cotton and ruin their livelihood. In corn states, farmers told him about 1 million new acres of corn. In wheat states, 1 million new acres of wheat. None of it was true. Swing suddenly realized why his colleagues in the East had been stalling on the dam. Their constituents were being misled about the real facts of the Colorado River. The electric light industry wanted control of power generation for themselves, keeping the U.S. government out of the game. The Federal Trade Commission began an investigation that detailed widespread bribery of congressmen, officials, and professors. Swing was finally turning the tide his way. The corruption case gave Swing the moral high ground, but opposition remained strong. Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover forced Swing to keep private electrical generation in the legislation. Swing was furious, but he had to accept Hoover's change. As 1928 opened, Swing was weary. Had he worked so tirelessly to see all his efforts washed away? Herbert Hoover's revision called for an irrigation dam only. This was a blow that pushed the project back to where it had been 6 years before. There was still more work to be done. Swing wrote letters to every congressman, explaining how the Colorado River could cause the same devastation as the Mississippi. He wrote articles and gave speeches explaining the need and the benefits of the project. Then something unexpected happened. Swing found he had a new ally. The LA Times began publishing editorials in support of the project. Seeing public opinion turning against private electrical production, Harry Chandler had changed his mind. Swing's former fiercest enemy was now a powerful ally. Chandler realized that plentiful water and electricity in Los Angeles, even if supplied by the federal government, would make up for any losses in Mexico. Then, quietly, it happened. On May 25, 1928, the Swing-Johnson bill, officially known as the Boulder Canyon Project Act, passed in the House of Representatives. The people of the Imperial Valley were ecstatic. The long-sought water security of the region was finally within reach. But the bill still had to pass the Senate, where Hiram Johnson worked to force a vote, and the senators of Utah and Arizona worked equally hard to prevent one. Hayden and Ashurst of Arizona filibustered, speaking continuously for 21 and a half hours, forcing adjournment before a vote could occur. The Senate floor nearly turned into a brawl. The best and worst of politics was on full display. And in the end, Johnson wrangled one concession. The Swing-Johnson bill would be the first one considered when the Senate returned in December, when the lack of a vote in May turned out to be the winning move. The senators from Utah and Arizona could not use the filibuster for the first item of the session. On December 14, 1928, the Senate passed the Swing-Johnson bill, and on December 21st, President Coolidge signed the Boulder Canyon Project Act, the largest public works project the United States had ever undertaken. After 20 years of arduous work, Swing finally reached his goal. The dream was about to become a reality. The Great Hoover Dam would now be built. At 726 feet high, impounding 26 million acre-feet of water, it would be the biggest dam in the world for years to come. Over 5,000 men worked 5 years to build it, with 110 of them losing their lives. Almost everything needed to build the dam, from the 6.5 million tons of concrete to the colossal steel tunnels, was fabricated close by in blistering heat and the cold of winter. Hoover Dam was so big that no one company had the capacity to build it. 6 construction companies united and became 6 companies incorporated. Despite the harsh conditions at the site, the dam was completed 2 years ahead of schedule, using technology that by today's standards was primitive. Its power output was 1.8 million horsepower, 4 times Niagara Falls. Hoover Dam harnessed water and power that fueled growth across the entire West, especially in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and later San Diego and Phoenix. It was the birth of an empire. On October 9, 1936, when the massive turbines first sent power across the desert to Los Angeles, 1 million people lined the streets to celebrate with a parade and a dazzling display of electric light. It was spellbinding. 6 companies went on to other great projects. Bechtel and Morris Knudsen built the Golden Gate and the San Francisco-Oakland Bay bridges. Shea built pipelines, tunnels, and roadways. Utah Construction built the Alaska Highway. And Henry Kaiser turned the West Coast into a manufacturing hub, building Liberty ships to help the United States fight the Second World War of the century. It's no exaggeration to say that Hoover Dam, set in motion by Phil Swing and the people of Imperial Valley, opened the western United States for development. Hoover Dam protected the people of the Imperial Valley from flooding, but the water still flowed through Mexico. The canal in the United States had been cut from the Boulder Canyon legislation as political deals were made, and a separate vote would be needed for its funding and construction. Congressman Swing persisted, and that vote came in December of 1932, 4 years later. Costing $35 million, about $700 million in today's dollars, the All-American Canal was completed in 1942. Many residents of the Imperial Valley today take pride that their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents helped build that canal with mules and scrapers under the blistering desert sun. Hoover Dam and the All-American Canal ensured that Imperial Valley farmers would have a reliable supply of water, not too much and not too little. In time, Imperial Valley would come to grow 80% of the nation's winter produce. And the Colorado River now serves 40 million people in the western United States and Mexico. Every drop of the river is allocated for beneficial use. In 1936, the world hailed Boulder Dam, later named Hoover Dam, as a magnificent engineering marvel. But as we know all too well today, there's always a price to pay in subjugating Mother Nature. As the reservoirs of Lake Mead and later Lake Powell filled, the delta of the Colorado River dried up and disappeared. 3,000 square miles of wildlife habitat was lost. The good news today is that international efforts are gaining momentum to bring the delta of the Colorado River back to life. Having completed the mission he had begun so many years before, Swing decided not to run for a 7th term in 1932. He remarked, "I have had the feeling that my efforts on behalf of and my connection with the Boulder Dam would likely soon be forgotten. Of necessity, mine must now be the voice of the past." Not so, Mr. Swing. We remember you, and we thank you and the countless men who took on the gargantuan task of building one of the most important and enduring works of our time. Your legacy will stand tall for generations to come.
loving hearts are all in tune. There's two lonesome people in the whole wide world. That's me and the man in the moon. When the little birds are nesting and I listen to them croon, there's two lonesome people in the whole wide world. That's me and the man in the moon.